Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in our series on inequality and difference, we are going to talk on activists and the issues of caste. And for the discussion on the topic, we have with us in our studios Dr. Shruti Vip. Dr. Shruti Vip is Assistant Professor in Department of History, PGDAV Evening College, University of Delhi. Dr. Vip has immense experience, and through the live platform of CEC, she has delivered ample of lectures, and all the lectures are uploaded for you on the YouTube. So friends, let's welcome our guest Dr. Shruti Vip, and let's try to understand today's topic in detail, that is activists and the issues of caste. Hello ma'am, welcome to the lecture.
Hello Gitika, thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity. So friends, as we were discussing and we have discussed in a number of lectures earlier, how the issue of caste is central and quite instrumental in understanding the whole concept of inequality and difference. So carrying our discussion further, today I shall be zeroing down on a few of political and social activists, and probably we would be talking about activists from 19th and 20th century and the important role that they played, the kind of issues they highlighted, and the differences in their attitudes towards the issue of caste. And through this discussion, I think your understanding on this issue would further be enhanced, and you would be able to understand the contemporary politics in a better way. So while there have been a number of challenges to the issue of caste, and it is not as if only during 19th or 20th centuries that these challenges to the caste system came. And in fact, the earliest challenge to the caste system that one can talk of is in terms of a number of heterodox sects that emerged during 6th century BCE. About these various sects, I have already discussed in detail in one of my earlier lectures. So I would request the students to revert back to those lectures if they are interested to know greater detail. But in passing reference, one can say that the new religions like Buddhism and Jainism definitely provided a challenge to the prevalent caste system that was prevalent in ancient India. But since today's topic of discussion is contemporary, viewpoint on caste and how contemporary leaders have discussed the issue, so I would be talking about four basic political and social thinkers and reformers, starting from Jyotiba Phule, and then B.R. Ambedkar, Mahatma Gandhi, and Bhagat Singh. Now, out of these four, while Phule can be considered more as a socio-cultural reformer who was more focused about initiatives concerning education and also gender equality, rest of the three names can safely be considered as part of the political struggle that India was going through in course of 20th century as a part of the freedom movement. While all these thinkers, they not only initiated a modern kind of philosophy and understanding towards the caste system, and also they kind of initiated a healthy discussion about the issue of caste and what was wrong in the caste system, but then there were certain differences also which need to be highlighted. So talking about Jyotiba Phule, who was born on 11th April 1827 and he lived till 28th November 1890. He can definitely be considered as one of the most important socio-cultural reformer who not only raised the issue of exploitation that was carried on in name of the caste system or the Varna system, but he also had some practical solutions to it. So it was not only the negativity or the negative approach or the criticism that became part of his philosophy, but he also had some very positive initiatives on his mind, and both he and his wife Savitri Phule, they kind of radicalized the whole environment, and they not only countered countered the current ideology that was prevalent, which largely focused on the exploitative tendencies that had been in the past, but they offered some valid solutions. And these solutions were in the form of an alternative education system that would not only enhance the mental faculties of the underprivileged and the downtrodden, but also to give them a moral upliftment, which was the need of hour. So, Jyotiba Phule, who was a very prominent, one of the very prominent social reformers of the 19th century India, revolted against the domination of the Brahmins, and he stood for the rights of peasants, for the underprivileged sections and other low caste fellow men. Jyotiba Phule was believed to be the first, male reformer to start an orphanage for the unfortunate children, and this was not only this orphanage was not only open for the underprivileged children, but for all children belonging to any caste, class, or creed. Then he was also one of the few who attacked the very sanctity of the Vedas. So rather than glorifying past and rather than glorifying Vedic religion, culture and philosophy, he was the one who started questioning the whole validity of the philosophy of the Vedas, because according to him, it was this very philosophy which had strengthened the core values of Varnashram Dharam and the fourfold Varna division of society, which was instrumental behind exploitation of the marginalized sections of society. So he considered various descriptions that were mentioned in the holy texts, in the Brahmanas and in other Brahmanical scriptures as fantasies and not as reality, but as fantasies which needed to be questioned and which needed to be reassessed and only then accepted or refuted. So therefore, the very validity of thought processes that had been going on since centuries and which were not even questioned. In fact, they were being further validated due to a number of reform movements, the religious reform movements that were taking place during 19th century, like Arya Samaj, etc., with its call of go back to Vedas, was given a halt by Phule, who kind of raised the question and who refused to believe as if whatever was given in Vedas was to be accepted as it is. So therefore, he raised the issue of the false consciousness that was there in the traditional scriptures, and that false consciousness must be reassessed, re-understood, re-questioned on the basis of rationality as well as on the basis of humanity, morality, etc. A very important organization that he started was the Satya Shodhak Samaj, and after tracing the history of Brahmanical domination in India, he started blaming the uppermost caste, the uppermost Varna, for framing very inhuman laws as part of the Manusmriti, and according to him, these had specifically been designed in order to suppress the lower castes so that all the menial tasks could be handed over to them, and a philosophy was also being devised alongside this strategy so as to further validate the whole theory of the Varna system, so that the lower castes stop raising questions and they accept whatever comes their way as a matter of karma or as a matter of their past actions in past lives. So, in 1873, Phule established Satya Shodhak Samaj, that is Society of Seekers of truth. The very term of this organization makes one realize that he was going to unearth the truth that lay behind the very basis of Indian society, the very basis of caste system, Varna order, and he was not going to rest unless and until that truth was exposed and shared with everyone. So, and all this was being done in order to liberate the lower castes from the suppression of the upper castes. So therefore, he was not one who was only going to philosophize or who was only going to talk about education as one of the important ways and means of bridging the gap, but he was also going to question the given norms and traditions and also to provide an alternative philosophy. And in 1876, there were as many as 316 members of the Satya Shodhak Samaj, and gradually this membership was going to increase. In 1868, in order to give the lower caste people more powers, Phule decided to construct a common bathing tank outside his house, and this was in addition to a number of other initiatives that he took, for example starting a number of schools for the underprivileged children, as well as starting homes for underprivileged children, as well as initiating widow remarriage or initiating homes for widows. So these were some of the initiatives which went a long way in not only helping the poor and the downtrodden, but also in mobilizing them, also in educating them, in giving them a more practical platform where they would learn basic skills of life and then move forward. He also promoted interdining regardless of the caste, which again was initiated specially in order to introduce some kind of self-confidence and morale boost, because the underprivileged sections of society, the poor and the downtrodden, had accepted their fate, and they were not really able to cope up with the kind of challenges that were coming their way. So this was the kind of initiative, the practical reform movement that was started by Phule and his wife Savitribai, and in fact he was not only a believer or a champion of caste equality, but he was equally particular about gender equality, and this was a great achievement for those times when issues of gender were still being brushed under the carpet. And in fact, he emphatically declared that within a family, it was okay if the husband was following one religion, the wife was following another religion, and the offspring or the child wanted to convert to Christianity. So this kind of thought process coming during 19th century, that too from a Dalit reformer, was definitely going to have a lot of emphasis and a lot of influence on future generation, and this definitely showed how broad-minded he was, and he was thinking ahead of his times, that he was not myopic in terms of religion, and he was okay if different members of a family were not kind of hereditarily adopting the religion that they had been born in, but they were kind of opting and they were using their own discretion in order to follow whatever religion they wanted to. Now, the next important leader that I would be discussing is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. He was born in 2nd October 1869 and died on 30th January 1948. Now, as you all know, he played a very important instrumental role during the freedom struggle, and especially his contribution from 1917 onwards till India gained independence, and even thereafter for a couple of years was nothing that can be said or described can suffice. He was not only a preeminent political leader and also an ideological leader of India, but he was also playing an important role of a social reformer, especially from 1920s onwards. And the issue that he raised time and again was the issue of untouchability. Now, because untouchability is an issue that was directly linked to the caste system, so therefore it would be interesting to discuss as to how differently Mahatma Gandhi raised this issue and how differently he tried to achieve caste equality without attacking the institution of caste. Now, himself being a practitioner of ahimsa and also satyagraha, he stood up against the discrimination of the poor and the marginalized in South Africa against the colonial regime, and the cornerstone of his philosophy, of course, was non-violence, which he implemented even in India from 1917 onwards. From 1917 to 1919, one can talk about a number of regional issues that he raised, and he tried to mobilize the local population on the basis of such issues. For example, the Champaran movement, and then then he raised the issue of Ahmedabad mill strike, which again was a local issue in favor of the mill workers who were suffering at the hands of the mill owners. And then of course the Bardoli Satyagraha, which again was in the favor of the peasants who were demanding relief in the revenue that was being appropriated from them at a time when there had been the failure of crops. So therefore, by raising these local issues, he was not only coming closer to the power circles, and he was not only becoming an important leader of the Congress, but at the same time he was also mobilizing masses, and masses of course meant people belonging to the marginalized sections of society, peasants, workers, and definitely all of them were not belonging to the upper caste. So therefore, his daily association with people on the ground level definitely motivated him and exposed him to the kind of exploitation that was that these people were going through in their day-to-day lives. Now, while Mahatma Gandhi is widely portrayed both inside and outside India as a champion, as one who championed against untouchability and as one who wanted greater rights and a respect for the downtrodden. But however, many historians and scholars, and especially Dalit thinkers, have raised their objections, and they have kind of highlighted the negativity that was implicit in Gandhian philosophy, and which was in fact running contrary to the claims that he was making, that he was against untouchability. So it is important to understand what were those philosophical strands that were so dear to his heart, that have been objected to by some other important thinkers. He called the poor, the downtrodden, as the Harijans, that is children of God, and through that term what emerged was a more of a patronizing kind of a feeling towards them, as if they human beings everywhere are children of God. So by calling the poor and the downtrodden especially as children of God, kind of negated the whole idea of equality. And so by putting them on a separate pedestal, or maybe on a much higher pedestal, and by roping in the issue of religion and God, the whole radicalism from this movement was taken away. And the more preferable term that has emerged in recent times, and the term which was floated by Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, was Dalit. So therefore, Dalit came to replace the term Harijan, which was not considered as a suitable term enough to describe the kind of sufferings that this particular section of society had gone through. B.R. Ambedkar saw Gandhi's activities and philosophy as detrimental to the whole cause of upliftment of Dalits and to the whole attack of the ideology of caste system that had been going on since Phule onwards. So therefore, this dichotomy that existed in Gandhian philosophy versus Ambedkar's philosophy has to be dealt with in greater detail. One major theme that emerges out of Gandhian philosophy vis-a-vis his views regarding caste is his silent support of the caste system, and in fact his validation of the usefulness of the Varna social order in India as part of the upholding of the morality in the society. He wanted the untouchability to be abolished, but was a strong supporter of the caste system for a long time during his lifespan. And in fact, he said in one of his writings, one can notice this statement, "I believe that caste has saved Hinduism from disintegration." So this was the kind of tacit support that he had, he used to give to the caste system, and he was a firm believer that the very unique way Indian civilization was flourishing and its very uniqueness lay in the institution of the caste system. So the very question of abolishing caste system just did not arise. He also said, to destroy the caste system and adopt the Western European social system means that Hindus must give up the principle of hereditary occupation, which is the soul of the caste system. The hereditary principle is an eternal principle. To change it is to create disorder. Now, with these kind of statements that he made time and again, it shows that he was a silent supporter of the caste system, and in fact, he thought that there was nothing wrong in the caste system. Though untouchability was definitely an evil institution, it had to go, but he refused to acknowledge that unless and until the caste system would go, untouchability would be remaining as it is. So therefore, this dichotomy and his belief in the greatness and uniqueness of Indian society as one being morally at a much higher pedestal than the Western society had a lot to do with the caste system, with the kind of fourfold Varna system needs to be understood. And Ambedkar had he was of a different opinion altogether, and I shall be dealing with Ambedkar soon, and then you would be able to understand as to how these two thought processes, though both the leaders were in favor of bringing about equality in society, in eradicating untouchability, in giving more rights to the Dalits, but then one was questioning, attacking the whole institution of caste system and just wanted a casteless society, while the other, that is Gandhiji, he was more in favor of continuing the traditional moral social order, and within the caste system he wanted that the people belonging to the upper caste and class should themselves become trustees and should themselves come forward and bring about this change in the society, and should themselves be the change makers, and this was never going to happen. So therefore, this dichotomy continued till the end. Now, the next important leader that one can talk of in passing reference is Bhagat Singh, who was born on 28 September 1907 and died at a very young death in 1931, 23rd March 1931. So, Bhagat Singh is definitely known as a very important political leader of the revolutionary movement, and as someone who was quite radical in his ideas, and though he was not a social reformer per se, but in his personal life and in a number of writings that the scholars can have gone through, lot of radicalism, social radicalism, and belief in the idea of equality and a clear-cut influence of Marxist ideology is implicit. Here I'm not going to go in much more detail regarding his philosophy, his political philosophy or his Marxist ideology, because we have to focus more on the caste system. So I would briefly be touching upon as to what were his views on Dalits and how he kind of raised the issue of inequality in a number of his writings as well as in a number of speeches that he delivered. So for the time being, I shall be taking a short break and come back soon. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for giving us this session. Friends, we will be back after a short break and would be discussing more. So be with us. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, today we are talking on activists and the issues of caste. And for the discussion on the topic, we have with us in our studios Dr. Shruti Whip. Dr. Shruti Whip is a professor who is teaching in PGDAV Evening College, and she is teaching in the Department of History. So let's welcome our guest, Dr. Shruti Whip, and let's try to know more about activists and the issues of caste. Hello ma'am, welcome to the lecture.
Hello Geetika. Thanks a lot for giving me this opportunity. So friends, we were discussing about Bhagat Singh, and I told you as to how the Marxist ideology had great influence, and the socialism, which definitely was not a movement which was going to accept any kind of inequality. So therefore, with that ideological bent of mind, a famous statement that was made by Bhagat Singh was, you are the real proletariat, get organized. Now, this was a statement that was made as he was addressing the poor and the marginalized. And the term proletariat here, just like in in USSR, the famous movement had been initiated at behest of the proletariats, and the famous slogan was, proletariats of the world unite. So in India also, he was kind of conveying the same idea and philosophy, that you are the real proletariats. The proletariats are not the ones who are working in factory. They are all those who are being exploited, all those who are bereft of resources, all those who are working for others and not adequately being paid. And here in terms of the caste system, all those who had been devoid of the kind of privileges, the kind of respectability, the kind of resources that the upper castes were enjoying. So therefore, with this kind of motivational thought process, he also was of the opinion that the Dalits are economically and socially the most oppressed sections of Indian society. So therefore, his political idealism also taught him this a very important and valid social message, that who was the most exploited and the depressed class of Indian society. It was not only the lower class per se, but also the lower caste, because traditionally they had been devoid important rights and privileges that had cleverly been taken away by the upper sections of the society. Another statement Bhagat Singh made was, bring revolution through social movements and then be prepared for political and economic revolutions. So this again was a very important understanding that emerged, and at such a young age he was able to realize that unless and until there was a social revolution, the whole cause of political and economic revolution cannot really be met. So therefore, the immediate agenda that must be there, and it must be the duty of all the important leaders who wanted to bring about independence in India, was to bring about social revolution. And what is meant by social revolution? It definitely does not mean independence from the British rule. It means independence from the age-old caste system, from the rigidities of the caste system, and from the exploitative tendencies that had been in place so far. And this was a far more forward way of thinking than many of the Congress leaders, who were only talking about political freedom. They were only either they were talking about dominion status, or they were talking about complete independence, Purna Swaraj, but not a word about social revolution. So with this kind of radicalism and forward thinking, one must mention the important role and contribution of Bhagat Singh, not only as a freedom fighter, not only as someone who fought bravely against the colonial regime and even bravely laid down his life, but also he was mature enough to realize the importance and the demand for bringing about an urgent social revolution, much earlier than political and economic revolution. So the sequence of event is very important, and unless and until you and we as contemporary students of history, sociology or political science realize the importance of this idea of social revolution that had been realized so many decades earlier by leaders like Bhagat Singh, change would not be able to come. So therefore both socialism as well as national liberation were going hand in hand, and they both were exerting a lot of influence over each other, and this was the overall impact which resulted in this kind of philosophical understanding of the whole issue of the caste system. Now, the last major leader that we would be discussing in greater detail is Dr. Bhim Rao Ambedkar, who was born on 14th April 1891, and he died in December 6, 1956. This was definitely one of the most, he was definitely one of the most important and influential, not only social reformer, but also political thinker, one of the constitution makers of India, and an eminent personality, a very well-read personality. Though he was born into a poor Mahar family, which was considered to be an untouchable caste during those times, and he spent most of his life fighting against social discrimination, both when he was a student in the village school and when he was not really able to make best use of the educational facilities that were available to the other fellow students who probably belonged to the upper castes, and he kept on championing against the philosophy of Chatur Varna, that is the categorization of Indian society into 4 varnas and the whole philosophy of the caste system. But soon he realized the futility of such an effort, and he realized that it would not really be possible to change the caste system, and therefore he, because he was so much disgusted and disappointed, he converted to Buddhism, because earlier he had the hope that probably with persuasion and with legality things would be changed. But when he realized that change was not really coming, he himself changed to Buddhism and also inspired a number of fellow marginalized sections of society to also convert and to lead a life and to follow a religion which does not really accept inequality. He motivated Dalits to stand up, to fight against their exploitation and also for their self-respect. Now this was a very important deviating factor, and the way his contribution stands out differently as compared to other leaders who also championed the cause of Dalits. So he was not one who was going to devise a patronizing kind of attitude towards them by calling them as children of God. So he said that you have to make your own destiny, and since you are born and you are part of humanity, so therefore you have all the right to live a life of not only freedom but also a life of respect. So therefore he instilled a lot of confidence and respect for themselves in their minds, and this was one of his greatest achievements. He firmly viewed caste system as antithetical, as against the liberation of the poor and the downtrodden. So this was another deviation that one can talk about in terms of Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy. While Gandhiji was a firm believer in the goodness and in the usefulness of the age-old Varna tradition, but here there was a leader who emphatically declared that unless and until this caste system goes and the Varna system goes, nothing will change, and in order to bring about positive change in society, this old philosophy has to go away and its validity has to be questioned. And this was going to be a major turning point for the future course of action. Now, if we talk about his legacy, his contribution, his achievements, another thing that emerges out of the research on Ambedkar is that he visualized a cultural revolution and called called out on the lower caste people to come forward, to get educated, to get themselves skilled, and to also get united. And only through these positive actions and initiatives they could think of achieving justice. So therefore justice was not going to be handed to them by the state through constitutional means. Of course that was going to be there, but then that was not going to be the game changer. The real game changer was going to be only when they themselves got educated, when they themselves took things in their hand, and they themselves became empowered enough to challenge the kind of atrocities that were being reaped on them. So therefore the whole issue of agency was very important in his philosophy. So the agency of the poor and the downtrodden, and to make them empowered enough to do that, both these things went hand in hand. So therefore one can talk both in terms of structure and agency when one is talking about Ambedkar's philosophy. So by structure here one can talk about a number of facilitating factors that he initiated, and probably the kind of constitutional reforms that were introduced, and the kind of reservation policy that was initiated, and the kind of policies and programs that were going to be implemented. All these can be considered as part of the structure. So this was the kind of structure that is visualized for bringing about a change in the lives of the impoverished and the downtrodden. But the structure on its own is of no use. It cannot really be made use of unless and until the poor also exercise their agency. So this exercising of agency really empowered Dalits, and it made them come to the center stage. And this is how you can also understand the present day politics, where Dalits and the OBCs have really come on their own, and they have really emerged as independent political, social, cultural forces. And it is no longer the structure only that is trying to put them on a particular path, or which is only trying to show them the particular direction that they ought to take. Equally important in their case is the role played by the agency of the Dalits, who are now getting better educated, who are now going to higher educational institutions, who are now getting selected in government jobs, and therefore exercising this whole agency with reference to the context of the structure. Now, he also motivated them enough not to wait for someone to come and to help them, to rescue them. So this term rescue was absent in his philosophy, because he wanted Dalits to be empowered so much that they are able to fight for themselves, they are able to fight their own battles, and he was the best example of this. He also was of the opinion that unless and until this independent outlook emerges among the poor and the underprivileged, they would not really be able to do away with serfdom, do away with slavery, do away with servile conditions, and do away with centuries of humiliation. And in order to achieve this, he also fell back on history. He also tried to trace the origin of the so-called fourth, Varna, the Shudra Varna, as not being untouchable, but rather belonging to the indigenous tribe who were kind of subjugated by the foreign invaders, and therefore they were, in fact, they belonged to the Kshatriya Varna, if one had to really categorize them into any particular Varna. So he conveyed this, and the similar view had also been championed by Phule while he was describing the origin of the impoverished and the downtrodden, as their being belonging originally to the upper caste, that is the Kshatriya Varna, and because the upper two castes, especially the Brahmins, they had their own hidden agenda and they wanted to get servile work done. So gradually, being at a power receiving end, they gradually transformed the indigenous inhabitants into the fourth Varna, and this is how the whole story of exploitation unfolded. So by giving this kind of a historical framework, he also tried to morally uplift and also tried to instill greater confidence in the history and the culture of the Dalits. Now, though Ambedkar was greatly influenced by socialism and by the idea of equality, class equality, but he did not really believe in a clear-cut class analysis, and intellectually, however, he grasped the link between caste and class in India. This again was a great achievement, and the present day economists like Amartya Sen, etc., have also done a great deal on unearthing this kind of interlinkage that exists between the two categories. Now, coming to Ambedkar and socialism, this again is a very interesting point of reference, because this also helps us in understanding as to what was the deeper philosophy that was working behind Ambedkar's ideas and notions on Indian society. Ambedkar, though not a Marxist himself, favored many Marxist principles. Because Marxist principles and ideology were about equality, so therefore he was open to such ideas. He subscribed to the material view of history and visualized a total change for bringing about equality. Just like the Marxist, dialectical materialism and the way Marxists view a classless society at the end of the struggle, similarly Ambedkar also championed the similar viewpoint, and he was of the opinion that unless and until there was a total change in the way society was organized and there was a total disbandment of the caste system, the change would not really be coming. Then on his idea of a public ownership of property, again one can say that he was a champion of democratic socialism. So while he was greatly influenced by Marxist ideology, but at the same time the kind of socialism that he visualized for India was not Marxist kind of socialism, but democratic socialism, which would be based on greater freedom for individual and also greater participation by the individuals in the whole process of nation building. Socialism must function within a democratic framework. So democracy and socialism need not be opposed to each other. Just like in USSR, these two tendencies were considered as opposite to each other, and what they preferred was socialism, Marxism. But here in India, what Ambedkar championed was democratic socialism, whereby it is the individual's right to decide about their future course of action, their participation, and there was no abolition of private property per se. But then at the same time, the state undertook the responsibility of bridging the gap between the rich and the poor. And there were a number of constitutional provisions, for example, fundamental rights, fundamental duties, directive principles of state policies. All these were incorporated with the clear-cut focus on establishment of a democratic socialist republic. Now, by 1947, after India's independence, and when the whole process of the constitution making was already going on, and which ultimately culminated in the in the implementation of the constitution in 1950, Ambedkar propounded, he supported the idea of state socialism. Even earlier, while he was active in politics during the freedom struggle, he had championed a very important party, and he established a very important party known as the Independent Labour Party, which had been set up in 1937. And in this, he adopted a broadly socialist program. And this socialist program, if we look at this party's manifesto, then we visualize as to how his aim was a redistribution of income and wealth, but not abolition of the concept of private property. So therefore, there was a very healthy balance between socialist principles as well as democratic values. A very important program of this Labour Party, Independent Labour Party, included state management of important industries and bringing about a just economic system. Now, this is a very important and valid point. So, the way Ambedkar visualized how India would champion the cause of the poor and the downtrodden, not by privatizing industries and agriculture, but by maintaining these, important mainstays of economy under the state control, because only the state could be relied on, could be depended on, and the state would be working well within the constitutional framework. So therefore, no individual could be trusted, and this is how he championed the cause of the poor and the downtrodden. The party visualized minimum standard of living for the workers, for the peasants, for the poor, for agricultural and industrial workers. So, as early as 1937, he had started demanding a bare minimum standard of life at a time when the Congress and its leaders were only struggling for independence. They were only asking for more and more political rights and more political reforms and a greater participation for Indians in the constitutional reform initiatives. And they were not really raising practical and valid issues that were related to majority of Indians. That is, what kind of lives the agricultural and industrial workers were leading. And this issue was raised by none other than Ambedkar, who said that the state must guarantee a bare minimum level for them to withstand the vagaries of nature as well as to withstand the hunger pangs, and this should be the duty of the state. So therefore, a parallel ideology was always there, and one needs to look beyond the framework of Indian National Congress. One needs to look beyond the demands that were raised by important leaders, by Congress leaders, and the way the freedom movement was progressing. And this alternative movement was far more radical. It was far more change oriented, and it was far more socialist in its outlook as compared to the core strategy that was being devised by the Congress. Now, carrying forward the discussion on state socialism, this needs to be understood with greater detail because this had great influence on the way Ambedkar kind of framed the constitution, and he prevailed upon the other members of the Constituent Assembly also to bring about and to mold the very contour of constitution. State socialism basically means that the state would implement a socialist program by controlling the industrial and agricultural sectors. So therefore, the mainstay of Indian economy cannot be privatized, and after 1990s, with the rising globalization and with increasing privatization, we can clearly see how this state socialism is taking a back foot, and what is now emerging is a clear-cut trend towards privatization, neoliberal economies, economic framework, and this open door policy which has resulted in mushrooming of a number of multinational corporations, and the way other countries are coming and investing in India in a big way has definitely brought about a change, and this is what is called neoliberal policy, neoliberal framework. So a very valid question that arises here is that with the onset of these changes, are we not really diluting the whole flavor of socialism that had been championed by our constitutional fathers, and is this dilution in a way also impacting the marginalized sections of society or not? Now, this is a very important and crucial discussion which cannot be undertaken in a hurry. So, I shall now take a break and carry forward the discussion in the next lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much, dear friends. As Dr. Shruti Vipasad said that we would be meeting again, and on that particular session we would be continuing further. So friends, till then we want you to see this lecture, as we are going to upload this on YouTube, and afterwards if you feel that there are certain queries, then you can contact us through our email ID. Our ID is info.cec@nic.in. Today we are taking your leave with the promise that very soon we are going to conduct another session. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much.